For 79 years, Japan operated under a self-imposed taboo: no aircraft carriers. The memory of World War II, when Japanese carrier strike groups terrorized the Pacific, was too fresh, too painful, too politically radioactive. Japan's post-war constitution explicitly limited its military to self-defense. The Maritime Self-Defense Force could have destroyers, submarines, patrol boats. But carriers? Absolutely not. That was the line that could not be crossed. Then, on October 3rd, 2021, something historic happened. An F-35B Lightning II, a fifth-generation stealth fighter capable of short takeoff and vertical landing, touched down on the deck of JS Izumo. Not for a brief test, for operational deployment. The Izumo, officially designated a multi-purpose destroyer for political reasons, had been quietly converted into what it actually is: an aircraft carrier. Japan's first since 1945. This was not an accident. This was not a gradual drift. This was a calculated strategic transformation that took years of planning, billions in investment, and careful political maneuvering to accomplish, and it changes everything about the balance of power in the Western Pacific. Today, we are going to examine why Japan's deployment of the F-35B and the conversion of the Izumo-class ships represents the most significant shift in regional military power in decades. By the end, you will understand how Japan has quietly crossed from a purely defensive navy into a true carrier strike force, and why that terrifies Beijing more than almost any other military development in the region. Let us start with the most fundamental question: why does the F-35B change everything? What makes this particular aircraft so strategically significant that its deployment marks a genuine revolution in Japanese military capability? The F-35B isn't just another fighter jet. It's a fifth-generation stealth platform with short takeoff and vertical landing capability, known as STOVL. That combination of features is extraordinarily rare and strategically powerful. Here's why it matters. Traditional carrier-based aircraft, like the F/A-18 Super Hornet, require long flight decks with catapult systems and arresting gear. You need a full-sized supercarrier, massive, expensive, politically controversial vessels that take decades to build and cost billions to operate. The F-35B eliminates all of that. It can operate from much smaller ships with minimal modifications. It doesn't need catapults. It doesn't need arresting wires. It just needs a reinforced deck and a ski jump ramp. This means Japan can convert existing helicopter destroyers, ships that were always designed with carrier conversion in mind, but never officially called carriers, into genuine strike platforms without the political firestorm of announcing a new carrier construction program. But the real game changer is the F-35B's combat capability. This is not a compromise aircraft that trades performance for vertical landing ability. The F-35B carries advanced sensors, can share targeting data across networked forces, operates with a radar cross-section smaller than a golf ball, and carries precision weapons internally to maintain stealth. When it launches from Izumo or Kaga, it is not just a fighter. It is a mobile sensor node, a strike platform, and an air superiority asset all in one package. Compare this to what Japan had before: helicopter-carrying destroyers with anti-submarine warfare as their primary mission. They were useful for defense, certainly, but incapable of projecting power beyond Japan's immediate coastal waters. The F-35B transforms these ships from defensive platforms into offensive strike carriers, capable of operating hundreds of kilometers from Japanese shores. Now let's examine why Japan made this transformation. What threats have become so pressing that Japan decided to break its 79-year carrier taboo? The answer has three names: China, North Korea, and Taiwan. Each represents a distinct but interconnected threat that Japan's traditional defensive posture could no longer adequately address. Start with China. The People's Liberation Army Navy has expanded at a pace unprecedented in modern naval history. China now operates 3 aircraft carriers, with more planned. It has built the world's largest navy by hull count. It has militarized artificial islands throughout the South China Sea, and it has made increasingly aggressive moves around the Senkaku Islands, territory that Japan administers, but China claims. Chinese naval activity in waters near Japan has increased dramatically. There are regular incursions into Japan's exclusive economic zone. Gray zone operations stay just below the threshold of open conflict, but they steadily erode Japanese control. Massive fishing fleets, backed by Coast Guard vessels and naval warships, operate just over the horizon. Japan's old defensive approach was to wait for threats to approach, then respond with patrol aircraft and destroyers. That approach was becoming inadequate. China was not attacking. It was simply occupying more and more space, more and more often, until its presence became normalized. Then there is North Korea. Missile tests fly over Japanese territory. Nuclear weapons development puts Tokyo within range. Unpredictable leadership makes deterrence calculations difficult. Japan needed the ability to respond quickly to threats emerging from the Korean peninsula. And finally, Taiwan. U.S. military analysts increasingly assess that a Chinese invasion of Taiwan could happen within the next decade. If that happens, Japan will be directly involved whether it wants to be or not. U.S. forces would operate from Japanese bases. Chinese forces would likely target those bases. And the sea lanes that bring 90% of Japan's energy imports run directly through the potential combat zone. Under the old defensive posture, Japan would be essentially reactive, trying to protect its own territory, while the battle for Taiwan raged nearby. With carrier strike capability, Japan can actively participate in defending the first island chain, conduct sea denial operations, and contribute meaningfully to U.S. efforts to prevent a successful invasion. This fundamentally transforms Japan from a passive defensive force into an active power projection capability. And that shift ripples through every strategic calculation in the Western Pacific. Let's be very clear about what this transformation means strategically. This is not just about Japan having carriers. This is about Japan demonstrating the will and the capability to operate military force at distance from its home islands. For decades, Japan's defense strategy was built around what is called passive defense, protecting Japanese territory and waters. The Maritime Self-Defense Force was structured for anti-submarine warfare, mine countermeasures, and coastal patrol. It was excellent at defending the home islands, and it was incapable of threatening anyone else. The Izumo, equipped with F-35B aircraft, changes that calculation completely. Now Japan can position a carrier strike group 500 kilometers from its shores and maintain persistent combat air patrol. It can threaten surface ships, conduct strike operations against land targets, and deny sea control to adversaries across vast areas of ocean. This matters enormously along the first island chain, the string of islands running from Japan through Taiwan to the Philippines that forms a natural barrier between China and the open Pacific. If conflict erupts, control of this chain becomes the decisive strategic question. Can China break through into the Pacific? Or can U.S. and allied forces contain Chinese naval power within the first island chain? Japan's carrier capability dramatically strengthens the defensive side of that equation. Instead of static defenses that can be overwhelmed or bypassed, Japan now has mobile strike platforms that can respond dynamically to Chinese movements. If Chinese carriers attempt to break through between Okinawa and Taiwan, Japanese F-35B aircraft operating from Izumo can contest that passage without waiting for land-based aircraft to fly hundreds of kilometers from Japanese airfields. This sends an unmistakable signal to Beijing. Japan is no longer a purely defensive force that can be pressured, intimidated, or gradually overwhelmed. Japan is now a peer competitor in naval aviation, with the ability to contest Chinese operations throughout the Western Pacific. Now let's talk about the alliance dimension, because Japan did not make this transformation in isolation. This is deeply integrated with US strategy, and it benefits enormously from American operational experience. The US Marine Corps has pioneered something called the Lightning Carrier concept. The idea is simple but powerful. Take an amphibious assault ship and load it primarily with F-35B jets instead of helicopters. Suddenly, you have a small aircraft carrier that can appear where needed, operate independently or as part of a larger fleet, and deliver significant strike capability without committing a full nuclear-powered supercarrier. Japan is essentially adopting this proven model, but with ships purpose-built for the mission from the beginning. This creates powerful synergies. Japanese and American F-35B jets can share targeting data through the same networks. They train together regularly. They use common logistics and maintenance procedures. In a crisis, a Japanese carrier strike group and a US Lightning carrier could operate as a combined force, doubling the available sorties and complicating Chinese defense planning enormously. From the US perspective, this is ideal. Japan is not just buying American equipment. Japan is taking on a genuine share of the regional defense burden. US carriers are overstretched, with too few hulls trying to cover global commitments. Every Japanese carrier operating in the Western Pacific is one less area that demands constant US carrier presence. Let's get technical for a moment and examine exactly how Japan converted the Izumo and Kaga from helicopter destroyers into genuine aircraft carriers. The Izumo-class ships were commissioned in 2015 and 2017 respectively. From the beginning, they featured suspiciously carrier-like characteristics: full-length flight decks, large aircraft elevators, substantial below-deck hangar space, and robust aviation support facilities. Officially, these were for operating helicopters. In reality, the basic structure was always carrier-capable. The conversion required three major modifications. First, the flight deck needed a heat-resistant coating. The F-35B's vertical landing mode directs superheated engine exhaust directly onto the deck. Without special treatment, the deck surface would literally melt and degrade. Japan installed heat-resistant panels and reinforced the deck structure at key spots where F-35Bs would conduct vertical landings. Second, a ski jump ramp was added to the bow. While the F-35B can take off vertically, doing so with a full weapons load and full fuel severely limits its range and capabilities. The ski jump allows short rolling takeoffs with much heavier loadouts, essentially giving aircraft carrier-like performance from a ship much smaller than a supercarrier. Third, internal modifications upgraded fuel systems, maintenance facilities, and weapons storage to support F-35B operations. The ships needed complete internal restructuring to handle the new aircraft type. The result? Izumo can now carry approximately 12 to 14 F-35Bs in an aviation-focused configuration, with additional helicopters for anti-submarine warfare. That is not as many aircraft as a United States supercarrier, but it is more than enough to establish AIR superiority over a contested area and provide persistent combat air patrols for a carrier strike group. Now let us talk about what the F-35B actually brings to the fight when operating from these carriers. The F-35B at sea is not just a fighter. It is a networked sensor and strike platform that operates as part of an integrated system. When F-35Bs launch from Izumo, they are immediately linked into a broader network that includes Aegis destroyers, airborne early warning aircraft, land-based radars, and allied platforms, including US forces. Here is a realistic combat scenario. A Chinese surface action group is operating 400 kilometers east of Taiwan. Under the old defensive model, Japan would monitor with patrol aircraft and wait to see if the Chinese group approached Japanese territory. With the F-35B equipped Izumo operating in the area, Japan has real-time options. The F-35Bs can conduct reconnaissance flights, gathering detailed intelligence on Chinese ships while remaining largely undetected because of their stealth. If the situation escalates, those same F-35Bs can conduct strike missions, targeting Chinese vessels with anti-ship missiles, while Japanese destroyers provide air defense for the carrier group. The F-35B sensor fusion capability means pilots receive a unified picture from multiple sources. They do not just see targets, they see the complete tactical picture. This dramatically reduces reaction time and increases effectiveness. In air-to-air combat, the F-35B's stealth and advanced avionics give it significant advantages over most regional threats. Chinese J-15 carrier-based fighters are fourth-generation aircraft, capable but lacking the stealth and sensor fusion that make the F-35 so lethal. In exercises, F-35s regularly achieve kill ratios of 20-1 or better against fourth-generation opponents. Let's examine the real-world exercises that have validated Japan's carrier strike capability. In October 2021, the inaugural F-35B operations on the Izumo involved U.S. Marine Corps pilots and aircraft working alongside Japanese crews. These were actual combat training missions, including takeoffs, landings, air defense scenarios, and strike packages coordinated with Japanese destroyers and U.S. ships. In 2023, during joint U.S. and Japan exercises in the East China Sea, Japan operated a full carrier strike group configuration for the first time. The Izumo was at the center, protected by Aegis-equipped destroyers, with F-35Bs conducting sustained combat air patrol over a multi-day period. They tested real-world scenarios, including anti-ship operations, air defense, and simulated strikes against land targets. The results exceeded expectations. Sortie generation rates were higher than predicted. Maintenance and logistics integration between Japanese and U.S. forces proved seamless. Most importantly, Japanese crews demonstrated they could operate this complex capability effectively with relatively little training time. Now let's address the limitations, because despite all these capabilities, Japanese carrier operations face real challenges. First, scale. Japan will likely operate only 2 carriers for the foreseeable future. That is enough to maintain one carrier on deployment while the other undergoes maintenance, but it is not enough to provide persistent coverage across all potential flashpoints simultaneously. Second, air wing size. 12 to 14 F-35Bs is significant, but it is small compared to U.S. supercarriers. In sustained combat operations, Japan would burn through sorties quickly and need time to rearm and refuel. Third, the carriers themselves are relatively vulnerable. They are smaller than supercarriers, with less armor and fewer defensive systems. A successful anti-ship missile strike could put the carrier out of action relatively easily. Fourth, operational experience. Japan has not operated carriers since 1945. The institutional knowledge and training pipelines are being built from scratch. While they are learning quickly, gaps remain. Finally, there is vulnerability to Chinese anti-access capabilities. China has invested heavily in anti-ship ballistic missiles like the DF-21D and the DF-26, specifically designed to threaten carriers. Operating close to Chinese shores means operating within range of these systems. These limitations do not negate the capability, but they do mean Japanese carriers are most effective when operating as part of a larger allied force rather than independently. Now a comparison that reveals why Japan succeeded where another regional power failed. South Korea. South Korea announced plans in 2020 to build its own light aircraft carrier. By 2024, the program was effectively dead. Cost overruns, political opposition, and questions about operational necessity combined to kill the project before construction started. Why did Japan succeed where South Korea failed? Japan had the industrial base. Japanese shipyards have built complex warships for decades. Japan had political will. because the security environment created a clear, compelling rationale. Japan used existing hulls rather than building from scratch, reducing costs and timelines. And Japan had a clear operational concept, proven by US Marines. The result is that Japan now operates 2 aircraft carriers. South Korea has shelved its carrier ambitions indefinitely. So what is the bottom line? Japan is no longer a purely defensive force. Japan can now project power throughout the First Island chain, contesting Chinese naval operations and providing genuine capability to defend Taiwan if conflict erupts. The US and Japan alliance has gained a force multiplier that extends American reach while reducing American burden. Most fundamentally, the strategic calculations that governed the Western Pacific for 79 years have changed. China can no longer assume Japanese forces will remain passive while Chinese carriers operate near Japanese interests. Regional powers must now account for Japanese carrier strike groups as a permanent feature of the military landscape. Japan crossed a line that seemed uncrossable for nearly 8 decades. They did it quietly, methodically, and with stunning effectiveness. The Izumo is not just a ship. It is a declaration that Japan will not be a bystander in shaping the future of the Western Pacific. And for Beijing, watching F-35Bs operate from Japanese carriers, that is a sobering reminder that their window for military adventurism may be closing faster than they planned. Do not forget to subscribe for more analysis of shifting military balances and strategic developments. Thanks for watching.